Hi, welcome to this joint session of the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs, together with the George Washington University Technology Commercialization Office. My name is Dr. Stephen Levine. I am one of the co-founders of SoPE with Jeff Housefeld and Arlen Meyer. We started SoPE quite some number of years ago, and the goal of SoPE is to really be a non-interventional but a educational resource for so many technology ideas that come out. Ideas come in clinical practice all the time. We're taking care of patients, we're looking at people differently, and some of us come up with ideas and say, I can do this better. I have another way of thinking about this. But when we come up with those ideas, we're challenged by lack of time, lack of resources, lack of knowledge. It's just too much work. I'm not sure I really want to develop an idea. And SoPE is here to really help you explore that a little bit further and a little bit deeper. And to do so without all of the challenges of people who have a secondary interest or a secondary gain by trying to want to get your help. We're here to help you in a very non-confrontational and a very supportive way. So we encourage you to participate as much as possible in this webinar. I'd like to introduce the moderator who will be really running the show here today, and his name is Brian Koblitz. Brian is the Interim Managing Director for Technology Commercialization Office at the George Washington University. Brian, take it away.
Steve, thank you, and thank you for stepping in on short notice for Jeff Housefeld. Such a pleasure to partner with the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. You have a wonderful group of people that are working hard to bring new technologies to the marketplace and improve the quality of life for a wide range of patients. And it's always great to work together, and especially on these events where we can help inform the community and increase the chances for success there. So I'm managing the technology commercialization at the George Washington University, and my focus here has been primarily on the life science side for the last roughly 10 years. And so I just want to point out that really our role here is very similar to yours as entrepreneurs. Except our primary role is to connect our technologies with you so that we can help get them to the market, because it doesn't happen at the university or at the research institute and the federal labs. So the goal for us is to be open, and we have an open door policy. We're happy to chat with you and explore ways that we can make connections and help find success for everybody. So you're welcome to touch base with any of us at our office and check out our website to find out ways to do that. One way that we like to leverage the ability to do that is through networking, and we have a platform I'd like to share on the next slide, where we have almost 100 entrepreneurs already connected there who are able to ask questions of each other and see if they have advice. So rather than waiting and getting only advice from me or from who I can think of to connect you with, this is a way that you can discuss amongst each other and get some good leads on people to talk to, or advisors, or suggestions on how to get things done. So please, all of you are welcome to join our GW Commercialization Advising Network. And there's a link on our website. It's very easy to do. The whole point is to make it simple to ask questions and get help, or give help. Next slide, please. I'd like to just highlight a few of the resources that we have available. So even before, but certainly after there's a license with us, then we provide a sort of concierge service to increase your odds for success. And so this takes a variety of means. A lot of it is working with networks and helping you build your team, helping you find the right advisors, or to speak with potential customers to make sure you have product market fit. In particular, I know that many of you are not yet connected to GW, so that Accelerate DC is a good opportunity for companies in that situation to take advantage of some of the educational programming that we have. And also that we leverage our personal networks to help get you the right people. And basically, it's very similar with all of the offices that we have presenting today. The technology transfer community is very collegial, and we're building relationships. And I'm so pleased to be able to bring to you people with much more experience than me, who are all wonderful to work with, which I know because we have joint inventions together that we are managing. And so we have, as you've seen from the invitation, representatives from the NIH, from University of Maryland, and from Cornell. And we're going to take a quick few minutes to introduce ourselves and programs similarly to how I have, and then we'll spend most of our time today in a question and answer session. With that, I'd like to introduce Amy, and go ahead. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. My name is Amy Gadia, and I'm a Senior Tech Transfer and Patenting Specialist at NCATS, which is one of the 27 institutes and centers of the NIH. We love our acronyms, NIH being National Institutes of Health, and NCATS being the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences. We're the youngest institute. We were formed about 10 years ago, and we just celebrated our birthday this year. I'm going to talk more about NCATS, but as background, I've been in tech transfer for many years before coming to the NIH. Like my co-panelist, I worked at a university tech transfer office at Johns Hopkins for several years, and I have seen the licensing to startups and that piece of it. Coming over to NIH, I'm focused more on collaboration agreements, managing IP. And you see several folks on this slide. They're my colleagues in our Office of Strategic Alliances, and some of them also manage the SBIR STTR program. I'm going to focus on tech transfer today, but did want to mention that that's a resource to entrepreneurs. Next slide, please. So the mission of NCATS is stated here. It's basically to help traverse that valley of death. As many of you know, you might have a great early stage discovery, but then you want to figure out how to take it to the next step, the next value inflection point. And that's where we come in. We collaborate and help physicians, entrepreneurs, and others do key studies in order to help them traverse that valley. Next slide, please. We do that mainly through collaborations. We love our acronyms. Like I said, DPI stands for the Division of Preclinical Innovation. That's our group that does collaborations through various programs. They're all across the world, in fact. We're not specific here to Maryland, so if there are entrepreneurs anywhere here in the US. Some programs can include international collaborators. We're happy to collaborate. On the right side, you see a lot of different logos of industry and biotech companies. I mentioned that here because 75% of our scientists are from these places. So they bring that unique industry perspective to doing collaborations. And our collaborations are where we provide in-kind resources. As I mentioned, we have many of them. We have over 300 collaborations right now with investigators all over the US. Next slide, please. This is one of the programs within our Division of Preclinical Innovation. It's called TREND, and another acronym is Therapeutics for Rare and Neglected Diseases. I mentioned this as just one example of a program that we have. It's a collaboration between our lab, and we have preclinical drug development expertise, and we'll collaborate with an academic, an MD, a PhD, anybody who wants to collaborate around a specific disease area. It has to be an intellectual collaboration, though. It's not where we're going to be the CRO or the contract research organization. We may work with our own CRO to perform key studies, but we are entering this as scientific collaborators. For example, we may perform toxicology studies that you need to support an investigational new drug application to the FDA. We've done that a number of times and helped our collaborator put together that package for the FDA. We take the project to a stage that's needed to attract a partner for clinical development. And because this program is focused on rare and neglected diseases, it's open to folks all over the world. And I don't have to tell you all that, rare and neglected diseases are, it's hard to find the patients and people who focus on this important work. So it's open to all. The partnerships are created and creative. And as I mentioned, it's a true collaboration. So there may be intellectual property that's generated, and we manage that through various tech transfer agreements. Oh, and I think that's it for me. I'm going to turn it over to Felicia at University of Maryland. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. I'm Felicia Metz. I'm the Associate Director at Ventures College Park. We're the Technology Transfer Office for the University of Maryland. For those of you not familiar with the University System of Maryland, we're in College Park. We don't have a medical school. Our main schools are engineering, we have business school, School of Public Health, ag, computer, math, and natural sciences. But we work closely with our sister institution, Up 95, University of Maryland, Baltimore. They have the professional schools and their own tech transfer office that deals with IP generated from that institution. But we have a lot of collaborations. Our engineers collaborate frequently with physicians there. And so particularly in the medical device area, we have a lot of resources and IP in that area. I've been with the office for about 20 years. We have a staff of 15, and we do all the traditional things that a tech transfer office does, and along with a lot more. Next slide, please. So our traditional responsibilities, we triage IP, we do the marketing and licensing, but we also do a lot of support for IP-based startups. We have a group called Startup UMD, which is really intended to corral the very distributed resources that we have on our campus to help support entrepreneurship and startups. Then, of course, we distribute income that's generated under licensing and government compliance, and lots more. Next slide, please. When we are deciding what commercialization path to take on a specific technology, you could go the route licensing to an existing company if you're lucky, or forming a startup. If you could keep clicking, please. So factors that weigh towards licensing to an existing established company: if we're already working with that company as an industry sponsor, there's a close to developed product, there's an existing relationship, or a portfolio fit. Factors that weigh towards forming a startup: there's a development need, the technology is very early stage. Do we think that by forming a startup, they'll be able to access a lot of funding resources available locally and regionally, and of course, economic development needs. And on our campus, we certainly we lean towards forming startups. The engineering technologies, especially very early stage, hard to get in the door. And so we find that forming a startup helps fill that development need and de-risk the technology further. Next slide, please. So I mentioned we have a lot of amazing resources on campus, but they are distributed. So my office, Ventures, in addition to our full-time staff, we have entrepreneurs and residents who have had some great successes and also some great failures. And they're available to meet with people who are thinking about starting a company. You can schedule appointments with them. We have site miners who assist with our proof of concept funding program through the state of Maryland, which is through a quasi state entity called TEDCO. They help identify technologies that might be a good fit for forming a startup around it. And there's a lot of funding available for that. We deal with IP funding. We have some seed grant programs when funding's available. We do a lot of workshops as well. One good thing about the pandemic was that we were able to offer our workshops at all times of day, and we have a YouTube channel, Startup UMD. So everything from doing basic accounting, bookkeeping for your company, forming a company, basics of IP, how to write a pitch deck, wide variety of resources and programs offered there. We also do CEO matching. We have an alumni network that we reach out to, and we do events, or we were doing events regularly to help introduce the network of entrepreneurs who we work with faculty members and other researchers who are looking for business leads for their companies. In our School of, if you could go back, MTech, which is in our School of Engineering, they administer I-Corps, GW and University of Maryland and other institutions are part of the DC node for I-Corps. It's a great program. I'd encourage you to look into that to see if it's available in your area. If you think you have an idea for something, this is a great way to help you focus on customer discovery and figure out if what you think your value proposition is really worth it, and is anybody going to pay for it. We also have incubators and accelerators on campus, a lot of programs geared towards students, but others for other researchers. The University System of Maryland also has an investment fund. There has to be some connection for the companies with the university, whether it's they have a license to IP or it's an alumni company. We also host the Small Business Development Center for State of Maryland, SBDC, and they do a lot of support for mostly sort of Main Street businesses, but also provide resources for IP-based startups. And we have some tech-specific programs, Maverick, which is for augmented and virtual reality. We have a new quantum startup foundry to be an accelerator for quantum companies, which is big for us. So a lot of great resources, a lot more information on our website if you're interested, but here's just a sampling. Next slide, please. I mentioned a lot of the funding opportunities available for our startup companies. And by piecing everything together, you can get close to or more than $500,000 in funding for qualified companies. So NSF I-Corps, that's $50,000 provided for market research, customer discovery. We have a medical device development fund to help further develop if you need a prototype, to help de-risk the technology a little bit more, collect data. I mentioned TEDCO's proof of concept funding program, the Maryland Innovation Initiative. There's two phases to it. The first phase is $115,000 that comes to the university to continue doing research. It's a small research project that's 9 months long, but part of the funding available can be for commercialization planning, patent prosecution, in addition to collecting data or doing whatever research is needed to get the technology to the next level. The second phase is company formation, and that's in the form of a loan to a company that's formed based around university IP. Maryland Innovation Initiative is available to 5 universities in the state. Maryland, University of Maryland, Baltimore, Hopkins are 3 of those institutions. UMBC and Morgan State are also included. Our campus also has a 30-plus-year-old program called Maryland Industrial Partnerships, and this is to encourage collaboration between companies and any university in the state. Our university administers the program on behalf of the state. So if you're a small company, you put up $10,000 for a $100,000 project and the state puts up the rest. Large companies, it's a 50-50 split. But this is good for, again, further development of IP. I mentioned the Maryland Momentum Fund. This is our state's investment program. We have a new fund that's about to kick off also from our campus, and Chesapeake-based Seed Capital Fund, which is more for environmental related companies. So a lot of work to get the funding, but money is available. And so if you know how to access it, work with us, we can help guide you through the process. Next slide, please. So for more information on resources available for startups, we have a startup guide, startupguide.umd.edu, where we also give a roadmap, which might be helpful if you're thinking about starting a company and you don't know where to begin. It is specific for researchers on our campus, but I think you can review it and think about how it might apply in your own instance. And it's everything from starting with an IP disclosure, dealing with conflicts of interest, how to form a company, how to register a company, how to go about finding a team, a management team, since that's critical, I think, to company success. And so we have a Candyland looking path for startup formation and resources. And my office's website, umventures.org, where you can find more information about my office and University of Maryland, Baltimore's office. And I think that was all that I had. And we'll pass it off to Donna.
Thank you. So I'm at Weill Cornell Medicine, and we are the medical college of Cornell University. Cornell has a campus up in Ithaca. They also have campus at Qatar in Doha, and we have Cornell Technion, which is with the Cornell Technion and the Israeli Technion campus. But at Weill Cornell Medicine, we have all of our physicians. And the next slide. So we have the Cornell Medicine Enterprise Innovation, and we have 4 different groups of 4 different things. We have our Tech Transfer Office, the Center for Technology Licensing, and we do all the essential things that everybody has just talked about. We manage intellectual property, we nurture new inventions, we educate entrepreneurs. We also have the Biopharma Alliances and research collaborations, which is outreach to industry. And so we do a lot of industry research, a lot of clinical trials, a lot of other things like that. We also have the BioVenture eLab, which is an entrepreneurial laboratory that has a couple of different programs yearly to train entrepreneurs, and people form companies and startups, and they really learn a lot more about the whole ecosystem. And then we also have accelerator funds, just as everyone else, the Datalist Fund, which is an internal fund, and provides about $100,000 to 3 or 4 different promising startups annually. So the group is about 20 to 25 people total, with entrepreneurs in residence. We have about 6 licensing officers within our Weill Cornell organization. And then we work closely with the entrepreneurial facilities up at the Ithaca campus as well. So there's a huge amount of resources for inventors and physician entrepreneurs. And then just the next slide and final slide, this just gives you kind of the overview of the roadmap from inception to commercialization. And we have the innovators at obviously the front end of this, and then our group, the Enterprise Innovation Group, works throughout the roadmap to really facilitate commercialization of technologies. And we have a lot of commercial partners and a massive alumni group. We have a large angel group that works with a lot of the startups here. And so the network in New York City, which is where Weill Cornell is we're part of a massive ecosystem with other institutions, and where Weill Cornell is, we're right near Rockefeller University, Hospital for Special Surgery, Memorial Sloan Kettering. And so it's a pretty big collaborative group of people. And my background, I've been doing this for about 25 years on a variety of different sides of it, from doing startup companies to managing offices. So I've worked at Columbia University, at Hospital for Special Surgery, and now Weill Cornell. And I'll stop there. We have a website at Cornell Technology Ventures, Cornell Technology Licensing, and you can find additional resources there. So I'll stop there and open it up to Steve and Brian for questions.
Thank you, Donna and Felicia and Amy. I think I'd like to start with one of the most critical questions for startups, and maybe we can start with Donna, and then everybody chime in as needed. Which is say there's a relationship between the entrepreneur and an inventor, and there's interest in exploring, developing the technology. At what point should the company consider to actually take a license or an option for the technology?
So it's a really good question. Obviously, we have a lot of entrepreneurs and inventors that kind of form up a company before they've taken an option and before they've taken a license. And so we work with them through, generating, the value proposition and really trying to form the intellectual property around that. Obviously, before they take any money, before they do any serious development work, we want them to take an option and then ultimately a license. And, university IP is sometimes very, very early stage, and sometimes, unfortunately, it doesn't always serve the company. So we try, when we do know that there's going to be a startup form, we try and work with that group to, develop the best intellectual property.
So I'm a Cornell, just as an example. So I'm a university-based physician, and I have an idea in my head, but my brother-in-law is an IP attorney, and he said, don't discuss it with anybody. What would you like to talk to me about in terms of my IP or my idea, and how much of it is mine and how much of it belongs to my institution?
So, with physicians, it's really tricky, right? So many of them have ideas that go on the outside, but they all have an employment agreement, which provides that anything within their field is going to be owned by the institution and the use of resources. And I'm sure every medical college and every medical school has an issue with clinicians that develop things in their garage or on the outside. But I think there's been plenty of litigation around people doing that, so that, if they are affiliated with an institution and they have an employment agreement, they really need to talk and at least disclose to the institution the invention, and then have a discussion about it. It's a fine line in some cases. I defer to Brian and Felicia and Amy on.
Steve, our focus is to really make this a no-brainer for the physicians and inventors because of the resources that our office provides. And I think that's probably the case, at the other institutions as well, right? Because when we're easy to work with and we provide added value in terms of expertise, both in the protection of the intellectual property and helping to build the team that's going to take things to market, then it makes that a very easy decision.
I think
we have policies as well regarding who owns what. When I give talks to not just our employees, but also students, I like to think of it as if the university is paying you to do something, then university probably owns it. And if you're paying the university, especially the students, then they generally own the IP. We ask for invention disclosures, even if you're not sure and there's a question, we'll help figure it out to see if it's university owned or not. Disclosures, you mentioned patent attorney said, don't talk about it with anyone. Disclosures to tech transfer office are kept confidential. So that doesn't constitute a public disclosure. And so, the earlier you talk to your institution's tech transfer office, I think the better, to figure out what's the right timing to disclose, what's the right timing for filing patent protection, if that's appropriate, or if there's another path.
And I wanted to add that, I'm sorry, Brian, I wanted to add that there's a trend in medicine that we all recognize where individual private practice is slowly dissipating as the corporate healthcare model continues to evolve. And for most physicians today, I think they're looking at corporate healthcare models where the employment agreement, whether it's an institution or it's a private practice, those agreements all contain some clause regarding IP. So it's not just institution anymore now. It's actually more ubiquitous in healthcare, and that's something that we want all of the SoPE members and everyone to understand, that you might have those restrictions, but those don't prevent you from reaching out and taking advantage of these kind of amazing resources that tech transfer has to offer.
So Amy, we have a question in the chat about what kind of incentives there are for inventors and researchers to do they get credit when they're inventing, and for any help they're providing to startups to transfer their technology out. You have a unique perspective in the federal lab. Can you tell us about how that's managed there?
So by incentives, do they mean incentives for our researchers to do this kind of work? Yeah, I think that, well, one of the slides that I didn't get a chance to talk about was about CRADAs. CRADAs are cooperative research and development agreements. Those are unique to federal labs. I'm not sure if that's an incentive in the financial sense, because that's not an agreement where any money flows back to the inventor, but it's one that allows our scientists to collaborate with others. I can think of one scientist in particular who is focused on a very rare disease, and through the CRADA mechanism, he was able to collaborate with the foundation, and the foundation supported his lab with a postdoc, and so he was really able to get that research going and move forward by having personnel in his lab to work on this research.
That's a fantastic point, that the opportunity for sponsored research or CRADA, it can arise from involvement with a startup company, and outside the federal labs, oftentimes that could take the form of an SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research Grant, or STTR, which is a grant that actually requires the collaboration with a research institute.
Right.
And of course, those are going to count toward the faculty's promotion and tenure, regardless of whether counting patents and licensing makes an effect.
Yeah.
Donna, do you have any impact on tenure from these activities?
No, I don't think we do yet, although people have been putting their patents and their, how much money they've raised in their startups with regard, but I think that it's still pretty early days. And, but, the grants certainly count when they do get STTRs and SBIRs, just as they do for you. So, but I think that, and I think I saw another question about, what can faculty do, when they want to work within their company, and that becomes tricky as well. Some faculty have taken sabbaticals to work on their companies, and I think it's changing. It's changing, and certainly with our enterprise innovation, the executive level at the institution, the senior leadership is more and more in favor of this, and they're all doing their own startups too. So
I'll add that at the University of Maryland, we did update our promotion and tenure policy a few years ago so that units can consider patents and entrepreneurship activities in promotion and tenure decisions. Unfortunately, it's up to the individual units on how to implement that, and I'm not sure any besides maybe one or two departments in engineering have actually implemented that, but it was supposed to be an incentive, especially to get early career tenure track faculty to also think about entrepreneurship, which has value. So yes, our policies do allow for them to get credit for those entrepreneurial activities. And the question, arrangements for full-time faculty to keep their appointments when they decide to work for the startup. And we have pretty flexible conflicts of interest and conflicts of commitment policies that do allow for that. It just requires disclosure and management to make sure that things are appropriately separate between the company and the university. In my mind, it's always best to have an outside management team. So if somebody wants to continue their institutional research, that they be able to do that while maybe having a, chief technology officer or chief scientific officer role in the company, but don't serve as CTO, or even they might have substantial equity in a company, but are only consulting, and our policies do allow for all sorts of arrangements.
Yeah, I think I'll second that, Felicia, that, we also work very hard to try to connect our inventors with entrepreneurs that have experience raising capital for startups. And this really increases the chances for success for everybody. And that's the goal. So I think that's the path of least resistance. But also in terms of the tenure and promotion, I think here we're fairly similar, that it's kind of at the discretion of the departments.
Brian, I did want to add a couple of points. Unlike the universities, our scientists and researchers can't be part of a startup because of conflicts of interest rules, but they can collaborate with startups through a CRADA mechanism. And in terms of financial incentives, I did want to mention that if their patents get licensed, we do share royalty money back with them, just like universities do. So there is that financial incentive.
So, Amy, I'd like to go back to you again, because you have unique perspective, and then we can compare and contrast with the universities. How do you decide which company to provide a license to if somebody is interested in taking a license?
So we have to use the Federal Register unless an invention came from a CRADA. We have to notify the public through a Federal Register notice, and then whichever company is interested has to fill out an application. And if we get numerous applications, we'll look at them all side by side, and we ask the companies to provide a commercial development plan. So unlike some universities or companies that are looking for the most lucrative license, we are looking for the licensee to commercially develop the technology to bring the benefits of the discovery to patients. That's not to say that we don't want a license that's in line with the marketplace, because we have to be stewards of taxpayer dollars. But we do look at the commercial development plan, above all else. So it's important to have one that shows that the technology is going to be developed and in a timely fashion.
So, Amy, if they provide a good development plan, and you've given out the notice, and they're the company to go to, what after that, then what does the process look like in terms of how long does it take to negotiate a license and that sort of thing?
Oh, if all goes smoothly, it shouldn't take too long. But with that said, we do have, if it's an exclusive license, it needs to go to our exclusive licensing group. We look at the exclusive licenses as a committee. We get feedback and try to incorporate that. I believe that meets monthly. So keep in mind that the NIH has various processes that take some time. We can't turn around a license in a day. Let's say that. I remember we were able to do that at Hopkins. If we're doing a faculty startup, we could do that. We can't do that here, just because even the Federal Register notice has to be up for, I think, at least 60 days. A lot of times we leave it up for 90 days. So that the public has adequate time to look at it.
Donna, I assume you're somewhere between the 1 day and the 90 days. So how does the process work in terms of application and negotiation?
Right. So we're somewhere between 1 and 90 days, and probably closer to the latter than the former. One of the things that we are doing here is developing fast track licenses for this faculty startups to try and make that process much easier. And so we've settled in on some relatively low but commercially reasonable terms. And it takes out a lot of the negotiation from the licenses. And so that's our goal, is to make sure that, we can facilitate a license quickly and not be a burden to a startup company that has, few resources. For licenses to established industry, obviously that's a different process, and those take longer, mostly because we have, the commercial development plan to take care of and the diligence. And so that's often the thing that takes the longest, is figuring out what that commercial development plan is.
We have a similar express license program for startups. So if they've demonstrated that they have some idea of what a product is, have a plan for developing it, which they might have already had an option, we have an express license, which can get done pretty quickly. Very generous terms that we've shopped around. Easy to remember too, I think. It's sort of a 3-3-3 model, where the university gets 3% equity, 3% royalties starting at a certain point, and then patent expense reimbursement starting in the third year. So 3-3-3. Of course, if someone doesn't like that and wants to negotiate something, we can always negotiate. And that, of course, takes much longer time, but we have our express model available too.
All right, here comes the real tough one. So let's see who can chime in. How does the entrepreneur know that the license terms are reasonable if they're not taking the express license?
Well, the SEC records licenses, terms tend to be redacted, but they could do, I guess the point being is that they could do some diligence research and try to obtain that information. It's the same kind of research that we do when we're negotiating the license.
Yeah, I think it's our goal to get the technology out there in public use for public benefit. So certainly University of Maryland, and I doubt any of the other institutions on the call are going to put roadblocks in the way to doing that. But we also have to balance making sure the company is being diligent towards commercialization. And so there might be certain milestones. We set milestones based on what you tell us. What are your plans? And if you need to pivot later, we do lots of amendments as well if things aren't working out. But I think we're quite reasonable. We always want people negotiating with us to get outside advice too, to see whether that's an attorney or someone else who has experience with doing university IP licenses. That's certainly helpful as well.
It's my experience too. I think most tech transfer offices, just as Felicia said, are really trying to get the technology out there. And it's my experience that if we have not very commercially reasonable terms, that we'll be back renegotiating that license at some point down the road, because the physician entrepreneur or the entrepreneur in general will realize maybe that the terms aren't as good. So I think it's pretty rare that a tech transfer office doesn't provide reasonable terms. I think most of the terms are, most of the licenses I've seen from institutions are very reasonable. In fact, cheap on the low side.
So you brought up the amending licenses, which is something that does come up often. And one way that licenses are amended, aside from if companies need to pivot and timelines are changing, is with the addition of new IP. So how do you manage if there are improvements made at the university, whether it's with or without research sponsored from the company? How do you deal with getting those necessary improvement rights to their companies?
So we certainly want to make sure that improvement IP is going to the company that has the base IP. We generally don't include an automatic grant of improvement rights because of other encumbrances that are pretty common at a university, where there might be mixed funding, where sponsors have a variety of rights. But where there is some improvement IP and we know a company is working in that area, that's usually the first company we reach out to see if they're interested in licensing additional or improvement work.
So Brian, just looking at one of the questions in the chat about sharing resources for startups and entrepreneurs, especially those coming out of government labs in the industry that aren't eligible for SBIRs. I would say that I just talked about one program from one institute. We have 27 institutes and centers. And, you know, the NIH has a plethora of resources and we can share some, but encourage you to look around at whatever institute you're interested in. So if you're focused on cancer, then NCI, heart, lung, and blood, all of these institutes have programs that aren't necessarily SBIR programs, just in-kind programs like Trend that I talked about.
There's a question about links. I'm also sharing a link to, there's a program called FedTech. This, if you are federal, this actually started as part of University of Maryland's I-Corps, and it's since spun out on its own. But they do sort of tech transfer type resources and education based around IP from federal labs and agencies. And so that's, if you are federal, that's a program to look into as well.
So I'm so excited about hearing all the resources that are available at GW, Cornell, and University of Maryland, but I'm not part of your faculty. How can I get access to you guys and all the resources that you provide for me, for potentially for me? I want to know how to get involved.
Well, so for us, we love to have outside entrepreneurs such as yourself to join us for our events. Particularly, you know, where we're sharing new innovations or showcasing our startups, because really what our job is to connect technology, people, and money, right? So you're a critical part of that equation, and you know, to connect you with technologies and people here, and to also, you know, help others take advantage of your experience, what you've gone through in entrepreneurship. So, you know, I would encourage you to, you know, reach out to us and find out, you know, what events might be a good fit for you. And there are, you know, other ways to connect as well, such as the commercialization advising network. So that's easily done virtually. Anybody else?
So it's difficult for a person in the community to just come in and access the resources, but we do have, I mentioned the BioVenture eLab. They have a program a couple of times a year, and they have a lot of people from the community who have come and taken those courses. So those aren't entirely closed. And then we have a lot of entrepreneurial events around New York City, not only Cornell or Weill Cornell specific, but also the larger community. New York City is really trying to grow its ecosystem in the life sciences. So I think generally there's a lot of, and just similar to what Brian said, I think we encourage people to come in, talk to us. It may be that we can link them up with a faculty member as well to help further develop their ideas.
At Maryland, if you're interested, depends on what you're interested in doing. If you want to get more familiar with what technologies are available for licensing, schedule a meeting. We do have a website, though it's not the easiest to navigate if you're just doing a technology search, but schedule a meeting. We can talk about what you're interested in and do some technology matchmaking. If you want to become part of our network of entrepreneurs, so that in the future, there might not be an opportunity now, but in the future, if there's something, we keep a list of contacts. We'll invite you to our events. That's a good way of getting involved as well. And
as I mentioned, the nature of NCATs is that we do collaborations. The vast majority of our portfolio is jointly owned with universities, actually. So it doesn't really matter where you're from. I showed you that map with the dots all over it. We have collaborations with folks from all over.
So we have a comment that, on somebody who wants to develop a medical app. They'd like to get some help on that. Is there additional way that they could, help get that help other than the ideas you already mentioned?
Yeah, so one is to by all means become a member of the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. So provides a lot of the resources and a lot of the networking opportunities for you. During this COVID pandemic, it curtailed our networking abilities on the local level, but we are part of that ecosystem that in multiple cities all across the world, not just the United States, with a very active chapter in New York specifically, and Donna's familiar with us. So by all means, use SoPE as a resource to help get you start getting you some information.
We also have an interesting question on kind of an interest in a non-exclusive license, and so that brings up the general question: does the company want a non-exclusive or an exclusive license in this space, and does that depend on the type of technology? And in particular, in this case, they're having trouble getting a non-exclusive license. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, my comment was, understand, why is the tech transfer officer being stubborn? What's their driver? They might have multiple offers on the table. It might be a platform technology that they want to be careful about commercializing. So hopefully you're able to present what your commercialization plan is in a way that convinces them that you'd be a good partner. They don't have to say yes, but hopefully if you work with them, and I think that's part of the negotiation, is making sure they understand that you have a plan in place and that you'll be able to move the technology forward.
Yeah, those are very good points. And I would add that, yes, it's going to depend on what the technology is. Is it a therapeutic? And if you're asking for a non-exclusive, does that effectively, does that make sense for that technology? Would anybody else take a non-exclusive to it? If not, then, maybe you should consider an exclusive. Is it a research tool, a medical device? I think to Felicia's point, whatever it is that you're asking for, be able to justify it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Amy. And really, why are companies taking a license in the first place?
Yeah,
it's to create a barrier to entry to their competitors, so that the VCs and angels are going to be willing to fund them because they're going to have a good chance of success, right? And if you have a non-exclusive, it doesn't really create a barrier to entry. So you would need to have another way in your business model to create that barrier for you to be able to get the funding you need to bring the product to market.
yeah. There was, I remember a faculty member had once asked for a non-exclusive when exclusive was really the way to go. And he said, it's because the non-exclusive is cheaper. It should be cheaper. But, to your point, Brian, even if it is cheaper, you have to be fundable. So if that's what you take, and then there aren't investors who want to back up your company, then cheaper at the beginning really didn't pay off in the long run.
Have any of you had experience, with a startup that made a mistake that maybe some of the people in our audience could learn from?
I think what's common is we have scientists and researchers who are true experts in their field, and so might have a belief that that expertise translates into other areas like fundraising, like you mentioned, and management. And I think those are really different skills and knowledge bases required. And so finding a management team that you trust and can work with, I think that's really critical. Where if you haven't done this before, getting good advice, getting good guidance, and finding someone who has that entrepreneurship experience to give you advice, whether it's just advising you as we have EIRs, entrepreneurs in residence, who can help brainstorm with you, or if you actually find someone who can be part of the company and management team.
I think that's a really important point. Smart people don't necessarily build great companies. You know, they need to have that expertise, and being able to read it out of a book doesn't at all translate to doing it. And I think, you know, one of the hardest things of all is understanding if your technology at the early stage is viable and valuable to someone else. And one of the things that I'm a great big fan of is customer discovery. And I think that a lot of startup companies don't do enough customer discovery to really understand what the value proposition of their technology is. And I think it comes back to, you know, kind of the fundamental, you know, when somebody walks into the office to see us, it's like, is that technology really worth something, or is it just a great idea? And so a lot of times I spend with our clinician entrepreneurs trying to kill their idea. And so we spend a lot of time really looking into, you know, what the value is and if there's something else that's been developed in the meantime, because having an idea and being able to translate that into a product are two completely different things, and understanding if it has any value at all to the customers out there. And so I've seen a few companies pivot after they've finally done some customer discovery on their products. So I think that's a critical.
That's great advice, you know, learning when you need to pivot, and then if you're going to fail fast. I think that's an important lesson to remember too.
And customer discovery is an ongoing process. You do it at the beginning and you do it again a year later, and you keep doing it over and over again, because in the last 10 years, the market has changed so much and so rapidly and so quickly that the stakeholders change. So you've got to keep looking at market research. It's a really important point.
And that's one of the really, I think, most valuable parts of iCore is teaching you how to do that customer discovery, not just trying to sell at someone, but asking questions. I had a comment from a faculty entrepreneur once who for years was talking about starting a company, never really did anything to make it happen, finally participated in iCore and said, we should require this of any faculty thinking about starting a company, if for nothing else, that they see the time commitments in having a company. And so if you're not familiar with iCore, I'd suggest looking into that as well. And someone asked about the role of EIRs at a university. And these are entrepreneurs who are available, at least for us, to give advice to people thinking about starting a company who aren't the tech transfer person that they're working with or might end up negotiating with, but someone to be a sounding board and help give advice with your idea.
In the past, when I worked at a university, they could also help with applications, commercialization, grant applications.
I think the third idea for the entrepreneur in residence role is that they have access to a lot of the technologies, you know, that are coming out of the university or the institution that are, you know, potentially might be exciting for them to take out and start a company as well, right? So that while they're helping people along the way, there may be some, you know, self-interest for them in the university and making that connection. Well, I appreciate all the, you know, fantastic interaction so far. Looks like we have another one. Let's just keep them rolling. We do, you know, we can stick around for a few more minutes here. So this question is, you know, how do the tech transfer offices deal with patent infringement?
Say it varies. Again, at least for us, our goal is making sure technology is being used, and we do that through licensing with appropriate diligence. So if someone is exploiting our IP without a license, our goal is to get them to take a license. And so I think it depends on what's being infringed, what are the facts of the situation, and different universities take different approaches as well.
I think the follow-up question to that is, you know, if say you do have a license and so some other company is infringing on the, you know, the startup or company you have a relationship with.
With our exclusive licensees, we're more than happy for them to take the lead on enforcing rights that they've licensed. It does get complicated as we're a state institution and reserve certain rights in licenses. But we want our exclusive licensees to be able to enforce rights that they need in order to build a fence around their product.
I think infringement is always going to be fact specific, but I've seen a couple of times where universities have hired, law firms to go after infringers and writing letters and then ultimately settling. It really is very, very fact dependent upon how, one deals with it. But most institutions don't have the budget to go after a full-fledged, infringement action.
And then patent infringement suits are really expensive. And so the university has to figure out what potential damages might be, what the return would be, try to find a law firm, say, who would work on a contingency basis. There's groups now who do financing of patent litigation. Some universities have worked through there. But again, it's, as Donna mentioned, very fact specific.
I guess this raises the point that it might be good advice for startups to do some freedom to operate searching early on in their process to avoid getting in that situation. Well, it looks like we're close to wrapping up. I appreciate all the insights from our experts. And if you have any last thoughts, let's go ahead and share those, and then we'll let people get back to their business days.
On behalf of the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs, we welcome everyone on this call or this webinar to join us. If you haven't joined us, participate as much as possible. When time comes and we can all face-to-face safely, then we look forward to those interactions as well. Consider us a resource. The goal here is strictly the education and the networking.